In a pivotal move during the Pacific War, Vice Admiral William Halsey Jr. authorized the most extensive carrier-based assault ever carried out by the United States Navy in November 1943. With a new fleet of American-built aircraft carriers, the Navy set out to demonstrate their power against a heavily fortified Japanese fleet that was already preparing for confrontation. The target was Rabaul, one of the most strategically vital islands in the Solomon chain. This assault aimed to divert Japanese attention and resources, safeguarding the crucial Allied invasion of Bougainville. The intensity of the operation also aimed to prove that carrier-based air forces could rival and even overpower land-based defenses, leaving no room for failure. Earlier in the war, in February 1943, the Americans concluded their first major offensive with the victory at Guadalcanal after a brutal 6-month campaign. However, this was just the beginning of a slow and grueling advance through the Solomon Islands, supported by coordinated land, sea, and air operations. At the northwestern edge of the island chain, Japanese forces fortified an existing naval base in New Britain, at Rabaul. The township soon became a focal point. Situated on the narrow St. George's Channel, Rabaul was one of the two main towns in the Bismarck archipelago. It housed one of the key Japanese naval bases for operations in the Solomons and New Guinea and boasted 5 pre-war airstrips. Before the war, Rabaul was a scenic island city set along one of the largest natural harbors in the region. This harbor, along with its airfields, made Rabaul a prime strategic location for both the American and Japanese military planners preparing for a wider conflict. Even prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Army and Navy had plans to establish a base that could counter Japanese ambitions in the Netherlands East Indies and serve as a refueling stop for military aircraft en route to the Philippines. As World War II intensified, Japanese warships and aircraft frequently staged at Rabaul before being dispatched southward to face advancing Allied forces. This made Rabaul a constant target for bombing runs by the U.S. Marines, U.S. Army, Royal Australian Air Force, and Royal New Zealand Air Force. These raids were often met with fierce resistance from elite Japanese Navy pilots flying Mitsubishi A-6M0 fighters and from numerous anti-aircraft batteries stationed across the area. By the fall of 1943, the relentless fighting for control of the Solomon Islands began to erode Rabaul's strategic strength. At the same time, a new challenge loomed for the Japanese. The U.S. Navy now possessed a new generation of aircraft carriers, built to replace those lost in earlier battles. These carriers were manned by thoroughly trained airmen and sailors, many of whom had learned directly from veterans of the brutal clashes at Midway, the Coral Sea, and throughout the Solomon Islands. Joining the experienced carriers, USS Saratoga and USS Enterprise, were the new 27,000-ton Essex-class fleet carriers and the 20,000-ton Independence-class light carriers. Alongside these vessels were new aircraft models, including Grumman, TBF Avenger torpedo bombers, Douglas SPD, Dauntless dive bombers, the recently developed Grumman F-6F Hellcat fighter, and the Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver dive bomber. As the Allied fleet moved toward the Solomon Islands, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Theater, devised a new strategy aimed at capturing carefully selected islands from the Japanese. Although earlier raids on Marcus Island, Tarawa Marken, and other small targets in August and September caused only limited damage, they gave U.S. naval airmen and sailors valuable combat experience that would serve them well in upcoming operations. Meanwhile, from Truk Island, Japan's Central Pacific Stronghold, a force of 7 heavy cruisers, 4 warships, and a fleet of troop transports set sail for Rabaul. Preparing for a major confrontation with the Allies, Operation Cartwheel was launched in late fall of 1943. It was a joint campaign led by General George Kenney, involving the U.S. 5th Air Force, the Royal Australian Air Force, and the Royal New Zealand Air Force. The mission focused on sustained bombing of Rabaul's airfields and port facilities. The first major raid took place on October 12 with 349 aircraft. But poor weather reduced its effectiveness. Attacks resumed on October 23 and continued for a week, culminating in a massive assault on November 2 on that day. 9 squadrons, totaling 80 North American B-25 Mitchell bombers, launched an attack, escorted by Lockheed P-38 Lightning fighters. The heavily defended base was targeted with bombing runs and low-altitude strafing focused on disabling anti-aircraft defenses. Only 8 B-25s were lost to enemy fire or crashes during the return. Among the casualties was Major Raymond Wilkins, who managed to destroy 2 enemy vessels while flying dangerously close under intense fire. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his bravery that day. Rabaul was one of the most fortified ports of the war, often referred to as a hornet's nest, due to its 5 airfields and dense anti-aircraft defenses. Aside from the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, no carrier-based mission had ever been attempted against such a well-protected target, as land-based assaults were generally considered more effective. The planned attack on Rabaul posed serious risks to both air and sea crews. Admiral William Halsey, who was organizing the Allied invasion of Bougainville, called the presence of the Japanese cruiser force at Rabaul the most desperate emergency of his command in the South Pacific. With the landings imminent, Admiral Halsey ordered 2 carriers under Rear Admiral Frederick Sherman to move north under cover of night and position themselves for a dawn assault. By November 5, 1943, Task Force 38 had closed to within 220 miles of Rabaul and was moving into striking position. Aircraft also launched from the recently captured Barracoma airfield at nearby Vella La Vella to intercept Japanese fighters and provide cover. At 7 a.m. Flight crews aboard the USS Saratoga launched 33 F-6F Hellcat fighters, 16 TBF Avenger torpedo bombers, and 22 SBD Dauntless dive bombers. The USS Princeton contributed 19 Hellcats and 7 Avengers to the assault. Conditions were clear as the American aircraft crossed the southern tip of New Ireland and followed St. George's Channel toward Rabaul. As they neared their target, they saw an opportunity. 6 Japanese heavy cruisers were moored in Simpson Harbor, along with 3 light cruisers, 11 destroyers, and many transport ships, some at anchor, others refueling. The American pilots were instructed to strike swiftly from the north, hit as many targets as possible, and return to the carriers. Rear Admiral Sherman launched all 97 available planes under cover of a weather front to maximize the surprise. An hour later, a follow-up bombing raid consisting of 27 B-2 for Liberators, escorted by 58 P-38 Lightnings, further punished the harbor. By the next day, most of Japan's major warships had left Rabaul for nearby bases to avoid further destruction and undergo repairs. The airstrike had significantly reduced the threat to Allied forces preparing to land at Bougainville. Carrier crews began counting their aircraft and crew after the mission and discovered that only 6 planes were missing, with 3 others lost to water landings. The total loss amounted to 9 aircraft and 14 personnel. With only 22 bombs. The Dauntless dive bombers managed to damage 5 of the 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 2 destroyers. The damage was so significant that the Japanese naval threat to Allied landings on Bougainville was drastically reduced. In response, Japan launched a counterattack involving 120 aircraft, aiming to strike the American carriers. However, the attackers were quickly intercepted, and 35 Japanese planes were lost before they could inflict any damage. The raid not only protected the ongoing Allied operations but also isolated Rabaul, stripping it of resources and reducing its role as a threat in the Pacific. The attack helped secure the capture of Bougainville and Buka, and for the first time brought Rabaul within range of land-based tactical bombers from the Navy and Marine Corps. These actions laid the groundwork for the campaign to fully neutralize Rabaul, which began less than 2 months later on December 17. The success of the Rabaul bombing shattered the previous belief that land-based air power was inherently superior to carrier-based forces. It proved that well-trained, well-led carrier air wings could inflict decisive damage on even the most heavily defended enemy positions. The men who fought in the skies over Rabaul remain a lasting example of how coordinated strategy and courageous execution can turn the tide in war.